Surprise, surprise. Yay. Woo. Other things we have going on the 25th, we have Miss Congeniality Watch Party. Is that happening at the Cesnans? So that's the 25th. So that means it's this week if I can still do math, which probably can. May the 4th is our Star Wars trivia night at the Hampton. So you can find out more about that on our Slack or by asking somebody or by referring to the flyers that Ferris has made. And then also, mark your calendars, Monday, May 12th, if you so choose to join us. Marty Solomon used to be some of y'all's pastors. Maybe you listen to the Bama podcast. Maybe he's just been a friend. He'll be in town and he's going to be at my house on May 12th. So come have dinner, hang out. Or if you don't know him and don't care, that's fine. Come have dinner, hang out. Other people will be there. That's great too. So keep an eye out for those events that we have coming up. So that's Monday, May 12th. But today is Resurrection Sunday. Today is Easter. We had a little Good Friday service this Friday, the day to do it, which is cute and sweet. And we sang worship music and we read the story from Luke. And the place that Easter comes from, right, is Good Friday. The story starts, of course, even earlier than that, but the setting, the context for that dawn morning 2,000 years ago starts at Good Friday. And so we read this passage together from Luke. And one of the things that stood out to us was the disciples, if you remember the story, Jesus' students, they fall asleep in the garden. Jesus says, please stay up, please pray with me. And they fall asleep. In the Luke account, it says the reason that they fell asleep. It says that they were exhausted from sorrow. And so maybe some of us show up this morning like, woo, Easter, yeah, ready to go, ready to party, yeah. But maybe some of us can connect with that, but maybe some of us more so can connect to that feeling of exhaustion from sorrow, whether that's something going on in our lives, in our mental health, in our workplace, in our families, or whether that's if we look outside the broader national scene, what's going on in the world. It's easy to feel exhausted from sorrow. It's easy to feel more like the disciples probably did. These women in the story that we're going to read this morning probably did. Confused, anxious, not quite knowing what's going on, starting to piece things together, right? Sometimes we imagine they had like the big whiteboard out and they were pulling all the prophecies and like dragging all the red thread around and being like, okay, this is happening because of this and this is happening because of this. But in the story, we certainly don't see them experiencing it that way. We see them experiencing it with confusion and frustration and then wonder and awe. So we're going to do something a little bit different today, this morning. We have all of the Easter sermons for the rest of our lives, right, to talk about all the different facets. We could do the theology of resurrection, what it means for us today. We could just do the gospel. But we're going to do something a little bit different. We're going to do some Lectio Divina, which we did at a church meeting, and people liked it. It went well. So if you hated it back then and you didn't speak up, be more negative so I know. But if you're confused, you're concerned, don't be. All that's required of you is that you sit there. I'd invite you also maybe to put both feet on the floor, maybe to take a deep breath with me. Maybe if you feel so secure and safe, you may choose to close your eyes. If you don't feel good doing that, that's totally fine. I've been there. I understand that. But I won't be looking at you. I'll be reading this story for us, with us all together, and invite you to imagine that you are there, not just reading the text as an outside observer, analyzing the story and analyzing doctrine, but being with these women on this cold Easter morning 2,000 years ago. Okay, this is the word of the Lord. Now, on the first day of the week, at very early dawn, the women came back to the tomb, bringing the fragrant spices which they had prepared. It's just before 5 a.m. and still pitch dark outside. It's only 50 degrees and a cold breeze floats through the window cracked open. You've been bent low over the mortar and pestle, grinding up chunks of resin into powdered frankincense to add to the oil simmering over the fire, dimly burning on the kitchen floor. The stone floor is cool beneath your bare feet, and you warm your chilled hands over the pot, breathing in the piney, earthy smell of the balm you're making. Last night was supposed to be the last night in the week-long Passover festival. Normally it's raucous, bursting with laughter, song, family, wine, kids scampering everywhere as the party tries to finish off the last crumbly, broken pieces of matzah before the festival ends. The community is supposed to sing Miriam's Song of the Sea from Exodus with triumph. Our enemies are supposed to have crumbled behind us. You're also supposed to have a solemn candlelit service to remember the names of those who have died. But otherwise, the last of the wine is supposed to be flowing, the best of the leftovers supposed to be gobbled up by young and old. This year, the triumphant words from Exodus were recited in monotone. Horse and rider he has thrown into the sea. The Lord is a warrior. The Lord is his name. Sobs punctuated the quiet reading last night. Why hadn't Jesus fought back against the Romans? The Lord is a warrior. He didn't even say anything at his trials. Where was God? When it was time for Miriam, Jesus' mother, to recite the prayer of remembrance for her son, she choked on the words. Wax from the candle she held in shaking hands dripped onto the smooth floor. Others had stood to finish the prayer on her behalf. May Adonai remember the soul of her son, our teacher, Yeshua ben Miriam, who has gone to the world above. May his soul be bound up in the bond of life with the souls of Abraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, and Leah, with the other righteous men and women who are in Gan Eden. Let us say amen. Today, once the morning fully begins, the community who traveled to come to Jerusalem for the holiday will pack up and begin the long trek home. A few will stay to sit in mourning with Miriam, but first there's something to do. Miriam appears at your side and hands you a squat red clay jar and carefully scoops the burial ointment from the pot simmering over the fire with a wooden spoon. The jar warms beneath your palms, and you're grateful to have something warm to carry with you into the chilly morning. A dull knock sounds from the wooden door behind you. You screw the lid onto the earthenware jar as Miriam steps around the fire to open the way for Joanna, and Salome. Joanna is armed with a torch, while Salome is holding a little earthenware pot similar to yours. You and Miriam slip on cold leather sandals and wrap yourselves snugly in head coverings before you step out into the Jerusalem morning. In the torchlight, Joanna still looks angry, but Salome just looks exhausted. Miriam takes a deep, shuddering breath, and the four of you set up the stony city stairs. It's time to do one last good thing. You pass empty market stalls, which will be full of vendors shouting in just a few hours. It's even colder out under the empty stars, and the four of you walk closely for warmth. You're grateful for the work it is for your legs to climb up these stairs across the city, and you find yourself counting the steps. The four of you pass a bakery where the smell of yeasted bread has started to spill out into the darkness. As you approach the city gate, a curved arch cutting a dark line through the sky, the Roman guards stationed there barely glance at you. Salome's eyes narrow and she spits on the worn stones. You elbow her in the ribs, but the guards appear not to have noticed. So the four of you step out of the city, onto a dark path lined with gnarled trees. Birds have begun to awaken and chirp in the branches, and you can't help but remember the last time you were walking along this well-worn track. Jesus was still with you. The boys had just brought him a donkey, like Jesus had said they would find one. He was always right about things like that. Not right about everything, though, apparently. Your eyes sting with tears, and you stubbornly blink them away. Joanna kicks rocks as you progress down the dirt road and inevitably stubs her toe, cursing under her breath. You skirt the bottom of the hill, avoiding the place where your best friend, your rabbi, your Lord, your hope for freedom was murdered. None of you wants to glance at the place that they were tortured to death, but your mind reminds you in a flash anyway. The smell of blood and vomit, sounds of agony from the three dying men. You look up, trying to focus on anything else. The dawn is coming soon, and the stars have begun to wink out in the gray approaching light. You take a deep breath as you near the quarry. Tears have begun to fall thickly from Miriam, and Salome grabs her hand. The grassy slope gives way to a quarry of white rock dug into the side of a hill. No one is working yet this morning, and the wooden engineering equipment is piled next to enormous blocks of stone stacked before Passover began. The air is dry, and chips of rock litter the ground. You carefully pick your way through the rubble to the corner of the quarry where Yosef of Arimathea's tomb was chiseled into the hillside. Someday, Yosef had said, they planned to make this place a garden, and so he had purchased this tomb for his family. It would be beautiful someday, but for now it was cold and ghostly. But something was wrong. The great stone blocking the entrance to the tomb had been dragged, scraped along the dusty quarry ground, and it stood silently beside the chiseled entrance. Where it was supposed to be stationed, there was only darkness and empty space. Joanna stops walking and gasps. Salome drops the torch and it sputters on the rocky floor. Miriam breaks into a sprint across the remaining distance and stoops into the tomb, calling, Jesus, Yeshu. Grief breaks over you and you sit down on the ground and rough pebbles scraping at your ankles. You were just trying to do the right thing. Why didn't Jesus do the right thing? Now he's gone and his body is gone. Where'd they take him? You were just trying to do the right thing. Just trying to do the right thing. Your spice jar rolls out of your numb hands. Useless. This is the word of the Lord. On the first day of the week, at the very early dawn, the women came back to the tomb, bringing the fragrant spices which they had prepared. They found the stone had been rolled away from the tomb, but when they went in, they did not find the body. You're watching Miriam scrabble around the dark, barren space, and it feels like the despair is going to drown you. It's a small space. There's no sun for her to find, and Joanna, standing beside you, starts to fully sob. You extend your hand out to her, but at that moment, the sun peeks over the horizon and casts its first rays through the quarry. And suddenly, lightning flashes. But it's not lightning, it's two men. Where did they come from? Are they guards? You and Salome cover your faces from the light as their robes flash again. The Romans say their gods flash with light like the sun. Are these men Romans? Are they angels? This is the word of the Lord. Suddenly, two men in clothes flashing like lightning stood beside them. The women were alarmed and bowed their faces to the ground, but the men said to them, Why do you look for the living amongst the dead? He is not here, but has risen. Remember how he told you while he was still in Galilee that the Son of Man must be handed over to sinners and be crucified, and on the third day rise again. Then they remembered his words, and returning from the tomb, they told all of this to the 11 and all the rest. You press up from the cold, rocky ground, sling an arm around Miriam to pull her up, and leave the spice jars and torch behind. Without even looking back, you grab the hands of the women you made this journey with and race out of the quarry. Your heart is beating so loud in your ears it almost drowns out your racing thoughts. The Son of Man wasn't supposed to be killed again. He was supposed to avenge the persecuted. But at the same time, you remember, like the men told you, as your feet pummel the dirt path winding around the hill and between the trees, you remember, way up in the north, beside the spring, Jesus had rebuked Peter and called him Hashatana, Satan. Why? Because Jesus, face etched with grief, had just told them he would be killed and then brought back. Jesus had jumped in as always to try to reassure Jesus, and Jesus had snapped back that Peter only cared about what people thought and not the things of God. Peter had been crushed and no one wanted to bring it up again. The air is full of birdsong now. So that wasn't just another parable, another story or metaphor about how people would reject Jesus but eventually see the right. It was about Jesus actually overthrowing the Romans, but more than that, overthrowing violence, torture, attempts to control, death itself. You skid through the gate across the slippery stone and practically tumble back down the city steps through the market. The dawn light has truly broken, and the sunbeams flowing over tall limestone walls cast the vendors' stalls into brightness and deep shadow. Figures move about the market, stacking boxes and frying flatbread as the four of you hurtle past. If he has risen, where is he? When Lazarus was raised, he walked out of the tomb. Where had Jesus gone? Are you just being an idiot? What if the Romans or the Sanhedrin took his body? What about the angels? Were they even? And then suddenly you're back at the door to the sprawling house. You hesitate before the door. The sun is warming your back. But what are you going to tell the others? But Miriam drops your hand, throws her shoulder into the door, and barrels through the kitchen toward the courtyard. Your mouth is suddenly dry as you follow her. Everyone is here. Everyone is packing up and preparing to leave Yerushalayim. The 12, no, the 11, are bunched together at the center of the courtyard, softly arguing. But the quiet, bustling peters into stillness as the four of you burst out from the kitchen into the open air. The sky is still tinged pink and orange, and Salome squeezes your shoulder. You take a small step forward and clear your throat. Okay, do you remember what Jesus said. This is the word of the Lord. The women remembered his words, and returning from the tomb, they told all of this to the 11 and to all the rest. Now it was Mary the Magdalene and Joanna, Mary the mother of James, and the other women with them, who told this to the apostles. But these words seemed to them an idle tale, and they did not believe them. But Peter got up and ran to the tomb. Stooping and looking in, he saw the linen cloths by themselves. Then he went home, amazed at what had happened. This is the word of the Lord. Feel free to open your eyes if you were, and then close. This is the story of Easter. This is a story we return to year after year, not necessarily one of triumph of our King rising, and we get to see it, and we get to see Satan all in red and, with horns and everything, crying and running away. We don't get to see any of that. We don't get to see any of the theology that we talk about and build our lives on, theology which is life-giving, important. What we get to return to year after year is this story, a story about darkness and grief and pain and state violence crushing the oppressed and the marginalized. There's injustice in this story. There's exhaustion in this story, just as there is in ourselves and all around us and across the world. But just perhaps in the midst of these women's faithfulness, perhaps in the midst of our own darkness, we can also hear the angels speak. And what do they tell the women? They tell them to remember something that they already knew, but is easy to forget for us as well. The thing that anchors our soul, the thing that is supposed to be our North Star that we can set our compass by, is the idea that death is not the end, that there is something that comes after pain, that suffering doesn't get the end of the story, but that our God is the God of the living, as these angels say, that he is constantly working and making new life out of darkness. That is his business. That is who he is. And all of that is because of his love for us. It's why he just doesn't leave us with everything broken and the world broken. The deserts and the waste places we have all the way back in Isaiah, they don't stay that way. They become gardens, they become springs, they burst into flower. 1 Corinthians 15, the last enemy to be abolished is death. So as we listen to this story, maybe we find ourselves alongside the women. Maybe we feel like we're the people who are trying to do the right thing. The thing that you do when somebody dies is you have stuff. You take your casserole, you take your spices, you check off the steps. Even when you don't know what to do, there are right things to do. And maybe we're like the women. We're seeking to do the right thing. We're seeking out Jesus. And somewhere in the middle of that, we find surprise. Maybe not answers yet to our grief, but enough hope to fuel our way back home and into our community. Maybe some of us feel more like the angels. They show up, they seem a little bit exasperated. You guys already know the answers. Maybe we feel like everybody around us is crumbling, and it's like, you guys, we know the right thing to do. We're supposed to be people who love people. We're supposed to be people who take care of people. We're supposed to be people who embody the gospel. And it just feels like everyone is forgotten. Maybe, though, we find ourselves alongside Peter. We think about the rest of the story. When we find Peter in this moment, he's surrounded by the skepticism and cynicism in the house. When we read the account, and the whole thing is there in the Slack if you want to read it all pieced together from Luke. There's misogyny from the very beginning of the early church, right? We see that in the Gospels. It says that they weren't believed because they were women. So this whole crowd of people, these 4 women come and they say, we saw something crazy and incredible, and this is what happened, and we've remembered this thing that Jesus told us, and no one believes them. But in that sea of people, Peter is the one who does choose to believe, maybe in the midst of his own cynicism, maybe in the midst of his own skepticism, not to just blindly say yes and believe and be like, okay, yeah, awesome, and then go and do something else, but to use his curiosity, his holy sacred curiosity, his just perhaps they might be right, to motivate him to go and run and see for himself. And why is that so significant? Peter is the one who has been stricken by embarrassment, right? Not 24 hours ago, They were in a garden, well, a little over 24 hours ago. They were in a garden. Jesus was being arrested, and everybody else held their composure. But Peter, what does he do? He chops off somebody's ear. And Jesus is like, no, that's not what we're doing. That's not what we're about. It's to glue the guy's ear back on. Embarrassing. Stricken by shame, probably, that he fell asleep in the garden to begin with. Some of us might have felt numbed to sleep. Some of us might have embarrassment that while we're trying to do the right thing, we get overcome by our frustration and our anger and we lash out. Peter is likely driven by guilt. That when it came down to it, he did shrug off his affiliation with Jesus. While Jesus is on trial at the fortress, someone not even important, asks Peter around the fire, don't you know that guy? He says, no idea what you're talking about. I'm just here at the fortress for fun. This is just where I hang out on Friday night. And maybe we find ourselves with Peter in that we've cut off not just somebody else's ear, but a part of ourselves when it gets uncomfortable being a Christian in 2025. And we say, well, I'm not like those people. I don't really want to affiliate that way. Maybe we find ourselves with Peter as well. Yet, with Peter, he has all of this baggage, all of this shame, embarrassment, guilt driving him. He's surrounded by skepticism and cynicism. And yet he chooses to be the odd one out, to go and run and see if just maybe these women aren't all just lying, but telling the truth. And so he goes out of the city and runs down the same path and finds the same wonder and amazement in the same quarry. But the angels don't appear to him, right? That would have been nice. Angels show up and be like, hey, did you hear the good news? They don't do that. Jesus doesn't show up to Peter or to John, as told in the other Gospels. It's almost like he wants to teach the early church to listen to women. But we can find ourselves with Peter just as we can find ourselves with the women and with the angels. When he gets to that crypt, he doesn't see, again, this glorious, triumphant, flexing, flag waving, fist emoji, we did it, from Jesus carved into the side of the wall. He finds a hollow, barren, carved crypt in the side of a Judean hillside, which might just mirror the hollow, carved, barren space in our heart. Hopefully, that's not the end of our story either, that we can, by revisiting this story and by rewalking these steps, we can also find ourselves in the midst of the story. So I'm going to read it one more time, and I'm going to pray, and we'll sing and talk about stuff. Luke 24, verses 1 through 12, the whole thing. This is the word of the Lord. On the first day of the week, at very early dawn, they came back to the tomb, bringing the fragrant spices which they had prepared. They found the stone had been rolled away from the tomb, but when they went in, they did not find the body. It happened that while they were perplexed about this, behold, two men in gleaming clothing stood near them. And as they were terrified and bowed their faces to the ground, they said to them, why are you looking for the living amongst the dead? He is not here, but has been raised. Remember how he spoke to you while he was in the Galilee, saying that the Son of Man must be delivered into the hands of men who are sinners and be crucified, and on the third day rise. They remembered his words, and when they returned to the tomb, they reported all these things to the 11 and to all the rest. Now, Miriam the Migdal and Joanna and Mary the mother of James and the others with them were telling these things to the apostles, and these words appeared to them as nonsense, and they refused to believe them. But Peter got up and ran to the tomb, bending over to look. He saw only the strips of linen cloth, and he went away to his home, wondering what had happened. God, I thank you for this story that church tradition has impressed upon us as part of our identity. It's part of who we are, is remembering this story. Just as part of who you are, that can't be taken away and removed, is that you are the God who makes life out of darkness, who makes creation out of nothingness. We are the people who stumble along behind you, full of wonder and amazement, and just sometimes piecing the answers together, but so often not. I pray that we would find ourselves with the women, surprised by Jesus, surprised by hope in the middle of trying to do the right thing. We find ourselves with Peter, surprised in the midst of skepticism and cynicism and feeling like, no, we do know the answer to this story and it's bad, everything is bad, that we would have the gumption, the chutzpah, the faith, the hope to run down that path after you. Pray that you would meet us in this next song as we mull over our own belief and our unbelief about this story or about the things in our lives that feel dead, that feel like you could never bring them back to life. I pray that you would show up in all of your glorious color and show us who you are through these places that feel like death, that feel like darkness, that feel like emptiness. So I pray that you would be with us in the singing of the song in your name, Jesus.